welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's my pleasure today to be here with Dr. Peter Rupert, an economist at UCSB, and somebody we're all familiar with because you are always in the news. You're always doing stuff with your economic forecast project, and you're really smart when it comes to the economics and sort of looking at the trends and looking forward to what's to come. And I know lots of people in this community turn to you for your insight and your expertise, and you're a teacher at UCSB affecting generations of students. And really, I'm honored that you would take the time to talk to me about some economic issues facing the city of Santa Barbara. Dr. Rupert, how are you doing today?
Great, Josh. Thanks so much for having me on. I really admire your work that you've done on the writing, and these podcasts I think are doing just great for the community. And I try to do what you're doing is, make sure the community is aware of certain issues and really want people to understand, what's going on so they can make better policy decisions, whether it's our official policymakers or businesses or residents, whoever needs information to make better decisions.
Yeah, well, thank you. And that is exactly why I want to talk to you today, because we have a vote coming up in the city of Santa Barbara having to do with rent control or rent stabilization, however you want to refer to it. But the city of Santa Barbara has been discussing this issue for some time now. And the latest flashpoint in this discussion is coming up Tuesday. And they're going to be talking about whether to proceed on this road, whether to pay some money for a consultant. And I wanted to talk to you about the issue of rent control, rent stabilization, what that means from an economic perspective. I think we can start the conversation with the premise that we would all love for everybody to be able to live in Santa Barbara and be able to afford housing in Santa Barbara, and that it's tough to make it work in Santa Barbara. So I'll let you speak for yourself, but I don't want any viewer to think that you're coming at this from a perspective of exclusivity. I think you're coming at it from a perspective of there are different ways to address this issue of housing in Santa Barbara. So let me just throw it out to you. What do you think of rent control? Is this going to work in Santa Barbara?
Look, I've given some talks around town about this, and historically I try not to give the same talk twice, but this issue is a big one for Santa Barbara. And what I mean by that is it's a decision that could be made that could affect our community for decades. And so we have to be very, very careful. So what do I think of rent control? Let me explain what a quick quote from Gunnar Myrdal, who won the Nobel Prize in 1974. And he was the main architect of the Swedish socialist system. So he's as socialist as you can possibly get. He said, rent control has in certain Western countries constituted maybe the worst example of poor planning by governments lacking courage and vision. And so the idea of rent control, has been around for a long time. I mean, it really started around the world back in the 1940s, right after World War II, and for different reasons in different countries, but many countries have gone through rent control. And I can tell you now, we have 80 some years of data. And I know many people don't trust economists, don't like economists, whatever. This is not about theory. I mean, our theories would suggest that rent control it does damage. However, the data is just unequivocal. In every place it's been tried around the world for some 80 years, it has failed. And and the same thing happens over and over and over again. What happens is, we see a deterioration of apartments. Not only that, we see a decline in the number of apartments available for rent. So if we have a housing shortage now and it's not affordable, a few years from now, we're going to see it's going to be even worse. And there's many places where you can go to think about that. The best one is Sweden. After World War II, they instituted rent control. The year before they instituted it, there was about 1,100 apartments available, and it was something like 40 people without a home. 3 years later, there were 0 apartments available and 1,200 people looking for apartments who didn't have a home. And this has happened in every place it's been. Cambridge, Massachusetts, the prime minister of Vietnam said, what the US couldn't do with bombs, we did to our own city with rent control.
Wow.
So this is a disaster in every city, that's ever happened. Just recently, there was rent control imposed in St. Paul, Minnesota. And by the way, every form of rent control, and I know that the city may want to do a study on how best to implement rent control. They're tried all over the place, all kinds of different forms. Rent stabilization. What does that mean? It means rents can only grow at a certain percent. Or you could think about the level of rents. You want to just hold it constant for a 10-year period, for example. That's been tried in Madrid. So, what basically happens is that all of these things are just a form of regulating prices. So let's take an example today, Josh. Suppose we said, okay, today, you can increase rents 2% per year plus inflation. Well, inflation is 8%. So are you going to say to people, okay, it's right now okay to raise, rates 10%? Inflation was 8%. Average wage growth in the United States was only a little over 4%. So what that means is that people's incomes aren't keeping up with that. So trying to devise a system to control rents like this is just not workable. It never has been, and it's never going to be.
Now, how you explain it, it makes sense, okay, from an economics perspective. But I've heard the argument from people who say, oh, come on, these are wealthy property owners. These are people who are trying to get the most amount of money that they can from their tenants. And a lot of them, they don't even live locally. They might be an investment property. Really, what we're talking about, Peter, is asking the homeowner, the property owners to maybe, can you take a little bit of less profit in order to help this community house the service workers, the people who help make the community run.
Right.
So can you talk about that? Because I'm sure there's lots of studies that indicate it doesn't work, but at the bare level, is this not just about asking the property owners, hey, why don't you take a little bit less to make the community a better place?
Right, right. So agreed. Now, one thing, and I don't have all the data on this, but, so for example, how many of these owners of apartments are corporations or companies or, many of them, I'll say close to 50%, are just individuals who own one apartment. It might be in their backyard, it might be above their garage, whatever. They're just barely making it themselves, perhaps. And so now you're asking them to take their own cut in income, when they're trying to survive as well. So once we've decided on rent control, we have to realize that we're redistributing income. And we would like to think, like you said, that these richer people who are owning the apartments maybe can take a little bit less. So that would be a transfer of income from richer people to poorer people. Okay. However, this recent study that happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, by the way, St. Paul instituted rent control in November of 2021. Just a few months later, they have seen an 80% decline in housing construction in St. Paul. And in Minneapolis, their neighbor, it's growing like crazy. Okay, so what happened in St. Paul? Two researchers from USC, they went and looked at parcel by parcel data, and they got house prices by parcel number. What they found was that in those lower income areas where there was rent control, housing prices fell. And in the areas that were richer, housing prices grew. So it turns out that the transfer of income was from poor people to rich people. So before we institute something like rent control, do people really know all the places where people are going to benefit or be hurt? Now, it's certainly true that certain people who are currently in their apartment, if their apartment's rent control, they'll gain. So those people will gain. It turns out, are we going to rent control every apartment in Santa Barbara? If we're going to choose some of them, a study in San Francisco showed that after rent control was imposed in the 90s, the average rent in the city went up by 5%, even though housing costs for the in the rent-controlled areas didn't rise by very much. So what we're doing basically is we're going to give some people who are already in those places, yes, they're going to benefit. Now, question: how long do they actually live there? Again, the study, the data from San Francisco, of maybe 5 years later, only 10% of the original people are still in those apartments. And because it's developed a housing shortage, now there are fewer apartments available. Anybody new coming in, low income individuals, they're really priced out of the market. So what you end up with is, rather than keeping a nice diverse community in terms of income and occupation, people have found you're actually gentrifying and these neighborhoods with rent control, just the opposite of what people were hoping for. So again, it's a very, very deep and controversial issue. Now, personally, I like to say, listen, sure, I think it's a bad idea. Almost every economist thinks it's a bad idea, including the socialist Gunnar Myrdal, you know. So is there a better way? And for me, there is a better way. So once you control prices and you do not let those individuals get the return on their investment, whether it's a small mom and pop shop, whether it's a corporation, they're not going to build any more houses. They're not going to keep them up. They're not going to maintain them. So what we really need to do is have some courage and vision, like Gunnar Myrdal said, for our politicians, come up with a better strategy. So what would that strategy be? So my way of thinking is we could do something like Section 8 housing, where low-income residents are subsidized. We could expand that program. Don't go through Section 8. Just give people the money directly. So it would be, you know, Josh, look, you know, I know you're not making much income as a journalist. Sorry about that. But, you know, and Santa Barbara is expensive. So we know that for you to rent a place, a 2-bedroom place for your family, or 3-bedroom, you know, it's $3,000 a month. Josh, we see that you're only able to afford $2,000. So we'll transfer that money directly. Mm-hmm. That is a real transfer from the tax base, richer people, to lower income people. What does that do? It allows you to pay the market rent. It allows the landlord to fix up the place. It allows construction to know they're going to get the market rent. So once we restrict people from getting the market rent, it's really going to be devastating for years to come, years to come.
So, I mean, that sounds like a really innovative idea. What would be the funding source in that kind of scenario? How would, for example, the city of Santa Barbara find money to pay for everyone who has a gap between their wage and what the market rent is?
Well, you know, look, I haven't gone that far yet, but, you know, Section 8 is a federal program. You know, what we're doing is we're taking taxes from people. We don't know which people. I mean, it's not like we're taking them directly from landlords. You know, we're taking them from all of us. And once as a society, we'd agree that, you know, we want people, like you said at the outset, you know, we want people to be living here and they may have a hard time living. So let's help them. And that's what I'm about. You know, I think we should help them. I want a very diverse community. You know, I love the fact, you know, what Santa Barbara is. I think rent control is going to change the landscape of Santa Barbara dramatically. And, you know, one that I'm really not in favor of. So I think that, you know, a lot of these things that people call unintended consequences, if you know something's going to happen for sure, is it an unintended consequence? I know what's going to happen, you know, both from theory and from the data that we have 80 years across the globe, that there's a increase in the shortage of housing, which eventually drives out people who can't afford it. We're not going to see any movement of lower income individuals, more diverse, coming into Santa Barbara. There would be an end to that.
Yeah, and you know, there's lots of nuances of government budgets and city funding and county funding, but just to your average person, when you hear, hey, they're going to spend $200,000 on a consultant study, $800,000 for a State Street master plan, you know, consultant study, and all of these other things the city of Santa Barbara spends money on. It's interesting to think, well, why would you spend money on the studies if you can actually give the money directly to people who are most in need? And, I'm sure there's other issues of how long would you want to do that? And, is there a sales tax that you could fund, like general fund and have some kind of program? But we saw during the pandemic, there was all of this sort of assistance that was handed out for people, rental relief, even restaurants, that sort of thing. When we hear the other side talk, it's a very emotional issue, and that makes sense. There are people in this community who grew up here, and maybe their family members did not own property, their parents rented, and then they have to rent, and then they're slowly getting pushed out. There's data that suggests that we're losing Latinos from Santa Barbara at higher rates than in the past. How do we tackle this issue, Peter, where you mentioned one program, right? Like maybe there's a more direct way to help people pay their rents, but from a bigger picture, how do we solve this problem where we have not enough housing? The housing we have, landlords are going to charge as much as they can or what they can, whatever the market bears. And you're always going to have Santa Barbara be a tourism industry. You're going to have people who can't afford these outrageous rental prices. How do we do this? What is the long-term answer?
Yeah. So look, the long-term answer, which, again, people don't want to hear, this is all about economics. This is about supply and demand. Yeah. The fact that Santa Barbara, we're living in a very high demand area for lots of reasons. Supply is restricted. And, let me see a politician come in and say, we can solve this problem. Let's build a bunch of, 40-story, high rises, down by the beach, or, no, you get laughed out of town, right? I mean, so, we've restricted building. It's very, very difficult. I mean, I'm really happy to see, AUD programs where people can add a unit to their garage or whatever. That's increasing supply a little bit. I think what a lot of people believe, and I've heard this from some, Santa Barbara's unique, and yeah, can landlords afford a little bit less? Well, Santa Barbara's not unique. No one is unique when it comes to the laws of economics. I mean, we have to abide by these laws. Santa Cruz thought they were unique. Santa Monica, you name it. Berlin instituted rent control 2 years ago. If you Google rent control in Berlin, what you'll find is everyone says after 1 year, it's a disaster. It just took a year, and I told you in St. Paul, it took just a few months. So this stuff can happen very, very fast, but it can have long lasting effects. And, Cambridge, Massachusetts, a very liberal place, they got rid of rent control. You name it, and places got rid of it. Sweden got rid of it. Now, if we want to go down the rent control path, what are we going to do? Is there going to be a rent control commission? How are we going to impose it? Now, if that's the study that's being done, I keep telling people around town, I'll give you 50 studies that have been done already. Give me the $200,000 and I will give it to renters. I'll just give it. So it's back to what you said. I mean, we're going to spend all this money on consultants to study a problem that we know the answer to. And believe me, there is no efficient way to impose rent control, whether it's the growth of the returns. Are we going to put it on old construction? Or are we going to put it on old construction and new construction? San Francisco's rule was they said, you know what? We know that there are these mom and pop owners of apartments. We won't put it on them. We'll put it on these, like 10, 20 unit, buildings. Then after a time, they said, well, that's kind of unfair, because what was happening is corporations were buying up the mom and pop shops that had no rent control, So then San Francisco voted, no, let's put it on everything. So that's a very nice natural experiment where you change the rule all of a sudden and they could see what happened. And that's where gentrification went up. Individuals, yes, they benefited for a time being, but at the end of 5 or 6 years, I can't remember the number is, only 10% of the original people were in those apartments. And so, again, I know they want to do a study. We don't need to spend $200,000 on a study. Believe me, we kind of know what's going to happen. And the question is, as a city, do we want to go down that path? And, my view is no study, let's work on other ways to sort of solve this problem that would lead to, more construction, et cetera. Now, point number two is we're not unique in terms of people want to live here. It's expensive to live in Manhattan. People commute 2 hours, to get into Manhattan to work. It's expensive to live in San Francisco. It's expensive to live in London. You name it, these cities all think they're kind of unique. Housing prices have gone up everywhere. That's going to slow down, obviously. We're not going to see such, but I don't believe rents are going to slow down in the near future. Rents are going to continue to grow. Now, do we think that capping rents at a 2% growth or whatever the number is going to be? No, all of those things that I mentioned are going to happen. In fact, what's really interesting, there's a book called Rent Control, Myths and Reality, written back in the 80s, where they go through country by country that's imposed it and talk about what happened. But the beginning of each chapter is a picture of a burnt out or bombed out building. And the caption underneath says, rent control or bomb damage. And like a third of them are from rent control from the South Bronx, from places where, over a certain number of years, things just get so bad that it looks like a bombed out building. So again, these are long-term consequences. Now, why do I think rent control exists? I think it's easy to implement. I mean, city council can just say, you know what, let's put rent control in the city of Santa Barbara. Put up your hand if you're for it. It's an easy solution. Number one, there are many more renters than landlords, right? So they can be outvoted. There's, and so that can happen. Your constituency, you might want to say, my constituency says we want rent control. This is where politicians need courage and vision. It doesn't work. My plan is, we have really talented people in town that can work out this issue. We don't need a study of a consultant. I'm happy to do whatever I can, and I know many, many people are willing to come up with a solution that's going to be fair, efficient, and long-lasting.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Really worth thinking about, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to learn a lot from what you're saying. I'm a journalist. My opinion doesn't matter, but I did grow up in this community, and we grew up as renters. I went to 5 different elementary schools because every time the rent went up, we moved. Try to find something the same as what we were paying, what my parents were paying. So I am somebody who's had to deal with poverty in Goleta, in Santa Barbara, whatever that looks like. I know obviously people have much worse around the world, but my frame of reference, and we didn't have any money. My parents didn't own any money. They never bought any houses. They never bought any homes. My father lives in a studio today. It's really difficult, and so when I hear like the theory of all this stuff, I'm always thinking like, I wish we could find a way to pay for locals. People were born here to stay in this community. I care a lot more about that than I do necessarily the activists who come into town who grew up in the Bay Area and want to do these things to sort of, look at this from a theory. I say, let's start at the beginning where I have so many friends who had to move out of the area.
I agree.
Oxnard, Ventura, Lompoc, or they just like, I'm going to Arizona. I'm going to Oregon, and so I think the real tragedy of this is that there's just a lot of local people who grew up here that got pushed out because of the high cost of rent. But at the same time, this is almost like a human nature issue. It's you can't legislate what people want to charge for rent because most people are going to charge what they can according to the market. And do you know, Peter, what is the profit margin for your, property owner? I know it varies, but
it varies.
Are they making, is it $1 million profits a year? What is it? Is it small? What is it?
Look, it's a very, very competitive business, and if people were making outrageous returns, they get bought out or there's new construction, going on, and again, as I said, many of these owners are just individuals who happen to own one small apartment there. And so that's why San Francisco said, let's just put it on, corporations. But given it's a very competitive business, their rates of return are not much different than anything else on any other investment. And, is it a lot to ask somebody to take, 2% less, or, well, if the profit margin is 4%, taking 2%, less, it's cut your profit in by 50%, so look, I don't know where it lies, but, as I said, if people are making outrageous profits, and that's why I mentioned the San Francisco thing, when people saw that these individuals who could charge market rent, because they had small little apartments, people came in and bought those up. And they bought them up because outside of that, rents are growing. And in San Francisco, we saw a 15% decline in the number of apartments available after they got rid of this rule. So, after they imposed rent control. So, look, there's lots of churning that goes on in a community, in a city, lots of it. So, imagine, in the 1970s, let's say, or 80s, you're with your family, you're a husband and wife, you have 2 kids, you're living in a 3-bedroom place, and suppose it's rent controlled. Now, suppose the kids move out, the spouse dies, now you're by yourself in a 3-bedroom house, you're not moving, right? You're not moving. And so, what that does is that stops a young family from being able to move into that place who would really value the space a lot more than you are, because it's rent controlled. So we're going to stop that kind of churning. And what you mentioned before, sure, there are some people who are moving out who are, native Santa Barbarans and who would like to be here. But if we have rent control, no one else is going to move in that looks like that. That's the problem. Who's going to move in? Well, it's going to be richer. It's going to be, as I said, the way the income gets redistributed. So I think, it's a hot button issue. There's no doubt about that. We can't let our emotions run away with us, though. We really have to understand what the long-term effects of this are going to be and how we can solve it. And unfortunately, can we build cheaper housing? Do we want to build low-income housing like we did in the 70s that was a complete disaster? In the short run, maybe people have to commute longer distances. We see that happening now. With housing prices going up so much, more people are moving to Lompoc, for example, and commuting in. Of course, that creates pollution. Maybe we have a better bus system. We widened the 101 freeway. Why didn't we put in a little light rail system like they have in many cities down the center, going from Ventura, up here, make it convenient for people. Not everyone can afford to live here or Manhattan. It's unfortunate. And we do need our school teachers, firefighters, people who work in restaurants. Give them the money directly. That's my point. Yeah. Let them decide, So anyway, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, well, when I was at the News Press back when I got hired in 99, God, that was a long time ago, we were writing about these issues, about long distance commutes from Ventura, Oxnard, Lompoc, Santa Maria. There've been talks of splitting the county over the years, because of the tale of 2 counties. People rent other places for less and come in. And so, it is an issue. It's been an issue for a long time. I'm going to ask you kind of a real petty journalism question, Peter.
Sure.
You're looking at a family. You're looking at a family, we'll say a Latino family, husband, wife, or, 2 parents and 3 kids. The rent's gone up. They can't afford it. They need to move. The theory makes sense. The data makes sense. What do you tell those people about what their options are without rent stabilization or rent control?
Right. Look, it's unfortunate. And, like I said, not everyone gets to live in Manhattan. Not everyone gets to live in these places. If I thought at all that, telling people, okay, let's fix that rent, for the next 10 years, which has been tried, and you can stay there, is that the best for our community? And, certain families are going to get hurt. Right now, certain families are being hurt, without rent control. Other families are going to be hurt with rent control. Some of those new people who want to move here, or maybe, someone who was in Santa Barbara who moved and they want to come back. I mean, that kind of movement, it always it always happens in any city. And, that's why I'm saying that, a better way is like, look, we understand you can't afford to live here right now. Is Lompoc a better place? Do I want to force somebody to move to Lompoc? No. Do I want to stop people from moving in who would value this place more? So I'm very interested in having a very diverse community. I love Santa Barbara, and I think it's hard, but is it any different than someone saying, I know you had a job in our business, but our business is not doing well. Sorry, you have to look for a new job. That happens, and it's unfortunate. So again, I want to make sure that we maintain the current structure, the demographics that we have, the diversity that we have for a long period of time. And I think rent control does exactly the opposite.
Yeah. I love your idea. Just give the money directly, much like the voucher system, to the people. And
we do it for food. We do it for food. We give people food stamps. We look at their income. We know what they should be spending for food, and we give them food stamps. Yeah. So, it's not like this is a brainstorming idea. It's like we already do it for certain commodities. And I realize that people, we need people, where to live. People should have a decent place to live. We all want that. So if we're going to keep growing, which, some people want to grow, some people don't want to grow, but how do we deal with the housing shortage? I say, don't make it even more short by having rent control. That's what I say.
All right. That's really good stuff, Peter. Thanks for taking some time to sort of hit that issue square on. I want to talk to you about just a couple of other things. We're coming out of the COVID pandemic. I guess we're in the endemic stage, and we all are behaving a lot like we used to before the pandemic. We're eating outside or eating inside. We're not wearing masks, although some people are, and the economy seems to be turning around. What do you see in terms of how we're coming out of the pandemic? Are we better than we were? Are we still way behind? What is the status of business?
Great question. I mean, I think if you look at the labor side of things, the employment side of things, we're pretty much back. Santa Barbara, we're now down to, the data came out today, I think it was like 3.4% unemployment rate or something like that. Employment is almost back to where it was pre-pandemic in many, many places. Still accommodation, food services is a little bit low. But, let's talk about that for a second. I mean, during the pandemic, before that, some people were working in industry just to make sure they had some income to live on. During the pandemic, when we got rid of a lot of businesses, we told businesses, you have to close down or you have to shut down, you can't eat indoors, et cetera. They had to lay people off, and we got PPP money, we got increased unemployment insurance. And, so what's the maybe bright side of that? That maybe it gave people an opportunity to say, you know what, that current job I was in, it really wasn't going anywhere. And, I want to go somewhere. So now that I have this extra unemployment insurance, maybe I can go back to school, learn a little bit more. Maybe I can search for a better fit for me now that I have a break, because it was a forced break. Yeah. And normally you wouldn't say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to quit. And then, what am I going to live on? But I think maybe, I'm hopeful about this, that it's given some people an opportunity to reflect on what they really want to do and get into better job matches. So people say right now we have more job vacancies in the United States than unemployed people by a long shot. So the question is, why aren't people taking those jobs? Well, part of it might be that they're looking for better opportunities, and we're starting to see, firms having to pay higher wages and bonuses and benefits to get people to come back to work. I hear it in every industry. So if there's a bright side to any of that, that's my hope. But in terms of the labor market, we're back, basically.
That's right.
Incomes are going up. Housing prices are just gone nuts. Rents have gone nuts. That's not going to continue in terms of housing prices. Now, is everyone going to work from home? I don't think so. I mean, I think many businesses believe that there's a cultural thing that you need to have for your business, that you need people around the shop. Do I think firms are going to give more flexibility? I think that's one of the demands right now of workers. Like, we want more flexibility. You know, sometimes we want to come into work, sometimes we don't. Sometimes I want to work 4 hours today and 9 hours tomorrow. And I think allowing that kind of flexibility is going to be very useful. I still see people buying office space. It's not like office space is going away. I think, you know, the Nordstrom building recently just got purchased. And I think what I heard was they're going to take the top 2 floors and they're going to turn them into offices. So they believe, you know, they put their money on the line. They believe that, you know, people are going to want to come to the office. I think Google told their employees to start coming back to work in Santa Barbara, you know. So Appfolio, I think now I ride my bike by their parking lot, and I can see that the parking lot is, getting more full, you know, day by day. So I think people are going to come back to work. I think people enjoy going to work. I think people enjoy the socialization. We're social animals after all, except for Josh. I know you stay home a lot and work at home, but you know.
Hey, I've earned that right. I spent a lot of years out there. Yeah. Let's talk, you mentioned Nordstrom. Let's talk a little bit about downtown. We have outdoor dining. We had this huge change where State Street was closed to traffic, at least several blocks of it. We moved outdoor dining, or we created outdoor dining. We had the parklets. And if you've been down there, it's amazing. There's like so much energy. You see a lot of young people. You see multi-generational people just sort of having a good time, eating, walking. There's skateboarders. There's just a whole new energy down there. Is State Street headed in the right direction? We still have retail storefronts that are vacant. What is it? The CVS, the Rite Aid just closed. Do you have any sort of micro thoughts on that part of town?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, once the pandemic happened, and we saw what was going to go on, you know, using our crystal ball, that if we told every business you couldn't be out in the street with dining, all those places would have closed. You know, and you know, to me that would have been just a devastating thing for our community. So I was a big proponent of saying, listen, you know, get people outside. You know, open up. You know, did we have to close down State Street? I'm not sure. You know, maybe the sidewalks were enough. I mean, let's not debate that at this point. I mean, the point was just to get people outside. You know, if we had a little more time, it would have been like, you know, like everything else we do here. We want every parklet to look the same. They should all have red tile roofs, you know, and whatever. But, you know, I was a big believer in just making sure these businesses stayed alive. And it is fun to see State Street, you know, alive like that. It's also fun to see the Funk Zone alive like that, with no planning, no anything. And I think if we let businesses do what they need to do, you know, I think that State Street will survive and it'll thrive like crazy. Do we need to shut down traffic on State? Again, I grew up in Burlingame, you know, up in the Bay Area. They have one street basically like State Street. They never shut down the Burlingame Avenue. They let parklets go out a little bit. They cut off some parking spots, but many restaurants are just on the sidewalk, and people are maneuvering around. They're able to get through and allow traffic. So I don't think it's about whether or not State Street is closed to cars. I just think that's kind of a little bit of a red herring, if you will. I think, you know, what's important is that we promote, you know, outside dining and let this look like a place that we'd want to walk down State Street and with our family and a stroller and their dog, and, you know, and enjoy being on State Street or whatever street. Now, some issues are tough. So, for example, how about the businesses off of State Street?
Yeah.
You didn't close those streets, a lot of them. You know, are we picking winners and losers by saying, look, you know, we let these individuals on State Street have a lot more space than they're paying for, right? They're paying rent, but now they have double the space because they're on the street. Other businesses off of State Street don't get that. So, I think we have to be really, really careful about who the winners and losers are, and how we think about, can we somehow help the losers who weren't able to branch out into the street. So I think it's a really tough issue, Josh.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned the funk zone in State Street, and I cover the city of Santa Barbara, and it's just, I don't know the right word. It's entertaining, interesting. Santa Barbara spends all this time on State Street with this committee and this master plan committee.
Yeah.
And they pull these people from the past and the present and these activists, and they get in these rooms and they talk about the future of State Street. And originally this bid they put out, the consultant said, oh, that's going to cost you $1.4 million.
I know.
So they have to reduce. And then you look at the funk zone, and we saw an organic development of it, and it's very popular. People love it. My only issue with the funk zone is there's not enough place to park, but I guess I'm not the demographic for it, because I drive my car everywhere, but there's some parking issues there, but it's a happening place where a lot of people go. And has there ever been the funk zone master plan committee? No. So I just think it's interesting that there's so much time spent on that sort of conversation, and we're nowhere near any sort of change. And now we have a new mayor, and who knows what's going to get changed. Maybe go back. Some of it might go back to the way it was, sort of thing. So it is interesting. I've had a couple of commercial real estate brokers on the show talk about hotels, and hotels are really a booming industry, the sale of hotels right now. And it's sort of a good time to buy a hotel, to open a hotel. And then that goes into this larger debate of, well, should it Santa Barbara be looking at housing kind of thing? What's going on with the hotel industry from an economics perspective? How long is that going to last?
That's a great question. I think that, I think leisure travel picked up very, very fast during the pandemic, and a little bit after. I think that kind of picked up. I think people were afraid to go on planes, and so they took their cars. And again, the hotel business is very, very competitive. So I don't know what's going on in that industry per se, but back to the issue that you were mentioning. I mean, we are kind of a tourist town. I don't think we should build Santa Barbara to be a tourist town. I mean, I think we should build Santa Barbara for me and for you who want to walk down and do that. And then for sure the tourists will come. I mean, if we built it for tourists, I'm not going downtown, So I think, I want, I like this churning idea. I like the idea that certain stores come and go. It's unfortunate for the ones that go, but, it's a dynamic environment we live in. And 30 years ago, we wouldn't have had a skate park, and, who knows what's going to happen. So I think that what we have to do is allow flexibility, just really allow flexibility, and, don't constrain businesses. I mean, businesses want to feed their family. They're going to figure out what they need to do, to feed the family, to get customers to come in. And, my view is government should let them do that, get out of the way of them, given zoning restrictions and things like that are fine, but, let's let it develop. And I think it'll be fantastic. I mean, so I also canvass Santa Barbara, but slightly different than you do. I go to Topa Topa, and I go to Third Window, and I go to Captain Fatty's. I get a lot of beer places, but I look at what's going on. And, if you look at Captain Fatty's and, off of Los Carneros, I mean, who would have thunk, that let's open a beer place in a warehouse, right? And you look at, M Special, these places, they're doing so well. Third Window, I don't know if you've been to Third Window, but it's, it's amazing what they're doing there. And it's where the old mill was, the mill.
Oh, in the funk zone, or on Haley?
Haley and Laguna. Yeah. It's right off the funk zone, Haley and Laguna. But, in Topa Topa and the Nook, all those places, really took off. The Lark, so, again, they're going to build things that people want, and they're going to change as tastes change. Do I think retail's dead? I do not. And anyway, I always give this quiz, during the height of the pandemic, what fraction of all sales was online sales? During the height of the pandemic. You want to guess?
What fraction of sales was online?
What percentage of sales were from online sales?
30%.
11.
11. Yeah.
11.
Okay.
Look, as I said, we are kind of social people. I mean, I think maybe they don't want to go to the store to buy certain items like toothpaste or toilet paper, whatever, but we like to walk down the street, try on shoes, try on clothes, buy flowers at a flower shop. We want to look, we want to, so I think retail is going to be there. And I'm not too worried about that. You're right. Vacancies on State Street, the biggest number I think we've ever had.
Yeah.
Kind of, right now, 40 or something, or, that's a problem. That's a definite problem. Can we legislate our way out of that? Don't think so. What's going to end up there? I don't know, but I'm not a retailer.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to give you the last word here. You're talking to the Santa Barbara City Council right now. What do you want to educate them about? Final say on the issue of rent control / rent stabilization and what they should do as legislators.
Yeah, my advice is, that rent control is going to damage our city for decades. And I don't think they realize that the depth of the problem. And I think that, I would tell them to back way off on doing studies about rent control. I think we have to look at other alternatives. I don't think we should think about whether we do a 2% cap, a 10-year cap, all that stuff. I would just throw it right out the window. And let's be innovative. And like Gunnar Myrdal said, let's have a little bit of courage and vision to tell those people who are advocating for rent control, listen, this is a tough one to tell you this, but we got to kind of let the market prevail here, because it's going to prevail one way or another. And I want it to prevail the way I want Santa Barbara to look like. So that's what I would tell them.
All right. The brilliant economic mind of Dr. Peter Rupert. Thanks a lot so much for taking time to talk to me about these very complex issues. And you have data, you have studies, and I also know you also have a heart, and it's a tough issue to come out at, but I know that you do care about having a diverse community, and it's not really an issue that can be solved by warring. It's an issue that can be solved by communication and collaboration. So thanks a lot, Dr. Rupert. Appreciate your time. All right.
Thank you so much. Take care.